We were discussing yesterday morning about this nature of cosmic illusion, and we saw that the problem is not to find another agency to explain the rise of ignorance and its continuance. The question is, if there is one omnipresent reality, how does it tolerate or allow the rise of ignorance and then a continuation of ignorance within its own self? Because according to our option, which we started, that it is an infinite existence, consciousness, and bliss, therefore constantly self aware. Now, in a self aware consciousness which is infinite, all the time conscious of its own being, consciousness, and delight, how does the phenomenon of ignorance, because we are included now in it, remember, whole cosmos is included in that one omnipresent reality, man included in it. Well, how is that? We are that, therefore. You see, in one line of argument, we can say we are that. Now, how does it happen that something which is itself has the ignorance and in ignorance which continues? There is a problem. How does it appear from that point of view? How does it feel to the infinite consciousness to have this ignorance? It cannot feel ignorance as we feel it because it is self aware. You understand? The Satchidananda, the infinite consciousness and bliss, cannot feel that I am ignorant. That is not possible. But something in it which is itself, ourselves, feels itself ignorant. Now, how does it feel to Satchidananda? Do you see? To it, how does it feel? It can't feel that I am ignorant. It feels, well, how am I allowing something else to happen within me, which to the my own part appears to be as if separative ignorance, or ignorance which is a wall of separation between the omnipresent reality and itself. Now, this is the problem, and that we are trying to tackle. Now, in India, there is a tradition and Upanishadic saying which says that the creation was due to tapas. Tapas is concentration. How did the infinite create the world? Then the Indian Upanishad answers, the Brahman, the infinite consciousness, performed tapas. Tapas is, well, you can say brooding, if you want. A good word for it is brooding. Concentration, we will say in modern language. Better word is brooding. Brooding in the sense of bringing out into actuality a felt potentiality. Something is felt as necessary, potential, something that can be created. And that idea, well, is held in the consciousness, brooded upon, and then it gets a dynamic movement, just as a bird sits on the egg, which we call brooding. Well, it is at that time not absent minded. Most probably, it is conscious of the being that it is, typal being of a bird, you see. And it broods. And this brooding, it is that is brooding on the potentiality of the egg. And when the concentration reaches a certain point, you find that it comes into actuality. So, well, this is a very bad and rough analogy, but it gives an idea of how the infinite concentrates tapas within its own self. Sa tapas taptva idam sarvam asrujata, Upanishad says, you see. Another Upanishad says, well, ekoham bahusyam, I am one, let me become many. That is a brooding. You understand the idea? I am one, let me become many. That's one idea of brooding. Or it says, tapas taptva idam sarvam asrujata. He energized, he concentrated, you can say he brooded and created this world. Out of the brooding, the universe was projected. You see? Idam sarvam, all this. And then, tadeva sruštva tat pravishat. Having created, he entered into it. So, well, that gives you one idea of how the creation of the world is explained in some of the Upanishads. Of course, the idea is only to convey to mind some, vague, well, similarity of the process that might have been involved. But he is now taking up the whole problem of concentration of the tapas. Having created, entered into, and became all these things himself, that is to say. All, even he became truth and falsehood, being and non-being, knowledge and ignorance. Everything that we see, even of the nature of duality, he became. But we are interested in the process of consciousness by which the infinite self-awareness allowed ignorance to rise within itself. That we want to know. Because how the absolute being, allows the rise of an integral consciousness and oneness is there at work. And how does it allow within itself a permission is how does it given to ignorance to arise? This ignorance which he describes manifold and narrowly self-limiting separative knowledge. This is his fine definition of ignorance. The ignorance that man feels is the ignorance, manifold and narrowly self-limiting separative knowledge. A knowledge which separates the being, narrows him down to his own consciousness, and it is manifold. In every center it is ignorant. Mind that it is manifold ignorance. In the sense matter is ignorant of its existence, so is life, so is man, and so each individual man again of other individuals and of the cosmos and of the ultimate reality. It is a manifold ignorance. One is ignorant of himself. He is ignorant of others. He is ignorant of the cosmic reality. He is ignorant of the ultimate truth. So that it is a manifold ignorance at work. How does this happen? And he takes up this question. And you cannot say, you can say that this is apparent division, yes, but how does the apparent division come into being? And how is it kept going? All the time it is operating. It is not as if it was static condition, fixed scenery of landscape and nothing was changing. Constantly there is a dynamic movement of expression in the universe, so that individuals go on changing and ignorance go on persisting. So that ignorance not only is allowed to rise, but is allowed to continue. Now this he wants to say how to explain to ourselves on the basis of one being. That is our problem. Because therefore, if you say that the being is ignorant, we cannot say that because it is self-aware according to our own assumption. Well, it is self-aware and one only reality. That's one. So we cannot say it ignorant of itself. Then secondly, you can say that that self is incapable of ignorance, in fact. And yet we are ignorant, therefore we can say that one self which is incapable of ignorance has somehow become capable of ignorance and has plunged into it in the human consciousness. By what necessity first? Was it a necessity? That is to say, an outside compulsion. Was it a choice of will? Was it only a possibility? Rise of ignorance in the Satchidananda, was it a will, a necessity, or a possibility? Each one, was it by compulsion that it happened, a need or a necessity, or a will, choice? Or thirdly, if you say, well, was there a possibility that it came into being seen as a possibility? There are philosophies that admit ignorance, but they say that Satchidananda, the ultimate reality, has not created ignorance or has not become ignorance. Mind has created ignorance. We cannot take that solution because for us, mind is also a part of the Satchidananda. So that is barred out for us. We cannot say mind creates ignorance. No. Mind is within the Satchidananda and therefore Satchidananda cannot be ignorant. Therefore mind cannot create ignorance. You see, even if mind is an ignorant phenomena, mind cannot explain ignorance to us because mind is within the formula of ignorance. One, that we rule out. Because we have admitted no two, one only reality. And in the one only reality, then mind cannot come in and create ignorance. Then there are other outlooks of religion and philosophy in which the ultimate reality and individual are accepted as two. They are not one. The ultimate reality is one, the individual is another reality. And the two, there is no unity or you can say oneness between the two. The divine and the individual are eternally dual, separate. This is also not allowed to us because from our point of view, And omnipresent reality is the only one truth. And therefore the individual is identical with the Supreme. The three statuses which we have already seen are the individual, the cosmic or universal, you can say cosmic or universal, and the transcendental. And these are one. You see, the one is this. This is an identity, not an equation, but an identity. So that the one that we talk of or speak of or posit in our philosophical outlook is one who stands at 3 points, is triple in his expression or manifestation. He seems to stand at 3 points: individual, universal, and transcendental. And it is identical. Identical in the sense of not at all making a fraction of himself on each point where he manifests. Total presence on each point. You see, that you have to remember. It's a mind that is working, and therefore mind says when it is an ounce or portion, it must be divided and small. It is not. The total presence is there on each point of his manifestation, individual, universal, and transcendental. So we cannot admit that also, because the one is the only one integral reality. Well, therefore, the Supreme that we have admitted must know himself, and he must know the cause of ignorance also. Ignorance happens because he intentionally perhaps causes ignorance to arise. Well, if you grant omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence, naturally it is the divine's will by which omnipotence omnipotence by which only ignorance could have arisen. Ignorance could not be against the fiat of the omnipotent and omniscient. It couldn't have come into being against omniscience and omnipotence of the divine. And therefore he takes the most rationalist standpoint to explain ignorance by an omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent reality. Well, if it is omnipotent, it has allowed ignorance to rise within itself. It has permitted ignorance. In fact, it has become ignorance. Now that is the problem. And he says, well, that we have to explain now. How? What is the cause? Why he allowed? No necessity could be outside himself. There must be a will or, well, a possibility. What was the nature of the will? What was the nature of the possibility? There is one explanation more which we have to rule out, and that is, well, people say that all this bother is nothing. It's a pother of the mind. You see, it is all waste of time. There is nothing to bother about. In fact, there is zero, non-existence, and you don't try to create a difficulty for your mind by positing some reality and trying to find it out. As somebody put it nicely, I think philosophy is, what is it? A man looking for a dark cat in a dark night in a dark or something. You see, there's something very fine, which doesn't exist. So he said, why not start with a zero, a void? And then Cherno said, then void, we would grant the void, there's no harm. But how can void give rise to an order, to a cosmos? The trouble is, if there was all, chaos at work and we saw nothing but accidents happening all the time, but we understand this is no use trying to search, because zero is at the bottom and something all the time happening. It is not. It's a world in which cosmos means order obtains, and our mind is able to envisage a law. Well, if that is so, then it cannot be a zero. Zero cannot give rise to an order. The point is that it must give rise to a chaos or an accidental world. You see, a world in which anything can happen anytime. So if you put an apple in the ground, you get grapes. Then we understand. You see, yes, if you put apple and you get grapes, that's all right. It can happen in the world. It doesn't happen. So then we say that then there must be not zero at the bottom. You understand? We say the standpoint, but we can't accept it. So then, if nothing is the basis and only chaos is not there, but order is there, and if you say it's a disease of the mind, but mind finds an order, so we have to explain this. Let us call that it is unknowable by the mind. Accept that position, he says. We accept the position that by mind we cannot know cause and the process of ignorance. We call it something, the ultimate reality, and the process by which it gives rise is some process. unknowable. Oh, right. He says we start with the unknowable. And we have seen that this unknowable to our mind takes up the aspect of Satchid Ananda, an infinite existence, consciousness, and bliss. That is that something, that unknown. When we try to analyze with the mind the whole process of the cosmos, man's being, and his effort at knowing self and the world, we find that at the bottom of all this, what must be an infinite existence, consciousness, and bliss. The unknowable reveals to our mental search or intellectual analysis as well infinite consciousness and bliss and existence. All right, then if that is so, how does such ignorance arise in Satchidananda? How ignorance came into this ultimate reality? One explanation can be that take analogy of man, he says. Man can have double aspect in himself. A witness self, which is passive, observer and inactive, active flow of nature, which we call, the prakriti, the nature flow, mind flowing, impulses flowing, ideas flowing, suggestion flowing, active consciousness, witness consciousness, which is passive and static. Could we say that in the Brahman or Satchidananda, a part is static like Purusha and part is active like Prakriti? That he says is not possible, because there can be no Prakriti that is not out, that is outside himself. In man, his whole consciousness is not yet capable of grasping his own nature or governing it. So he separates and finds his nature. And he is also not able to govern his nature completely till he rises to his universal consciousness, because nature that is flowing in him is not individual but universal. The flow of nature, when thoughts come into mind, people wrongly think that it is their own mind. It is the universal mind which is allowing the current or stream to flow, and the mind is open to it, therefore the current is flowing. If you want to control it, you have to rise to a consciousness where you are in charge of the what you call the station dynamo. You see, if you don't go to the cosmic consciousness, you cannot control the current of mind. You can separate. That is possible. So you can stand on an individual station without participating in the flow. And you can, because you are passive, because you are the observer and witness, you have a partial authority, so to say, delegated to you from the cosmic self. And if you govern and will from there that certain thought will not come, well, they may stop. But to give a thorough control, you must be in the controlling station. You see, you must be in the controlling station to really switch off and switch on. Then you know how things happen. You see, well, that is the cosmic consciousness, and the individual can widen out with the Purusha consciousness to begin with. He can widen out into the cosmic consciousness. And when he is in the cosmic consciousness, then he knows the origin, he knows the control, and so on. Now, here he says this is not allowed to us to posit this in Satchidananda, because there is no nature which is outside himself that he can observe as flowing and himself separate. There is only one omnipresent reality, whether static or dynamic. What you call static, really speaking, is nothing but a fixed aspect of the dynamic. Even scientifically today, this table we say is static. It's not static. Science says that atoms and electrons are moving at great speed in the science, so that it is fixation of a dynamic movement. It is fixed dynamics that appears as status. This is the whole interstellar space. Every day is repeating itself, and you say at certain night, on a certain night, certain constellations will be in certain position. They are not fixed there. They are moving all the time. And when you see them as fixed, even then movement is taking place, and an intense movement is taking place. So that to us, when we say status, it only means fixing of the dynamics, or a movement that is, a dynamic movement which is seen so constantly as to appear to us as if it was not moving at all. It is really moving all the time. So he says that in man, this division between the two, the dichotomy of Purusha and Prakriti, because Satchidananda is himself all, Prakriti also is himself. How can he have this separation allowed to him? You see? Therefore, that is not possible for us to admit this explanation of a static being in Satchidananda and a dynamic higher nature or lower nature. Cannot be. It is one. It is himself. So, being the only consciousness, then Consciousness is not at all active. You say status. When you say status, also it is nothing else but a movement of energy. And man also moves from active to passive, passive to active. But in Satchidananda, such a thing cannot happen because everything in him is simultaneous. Man can go into his Purusha consciousness and watch his nature as if it was separate. He can come to active movement of nature and watch Purusha consciousness absent and only identify with nature. But in Satchidananda, such a dichotomy is not possible because all is one and himself. So what happens? He is self-aware. What happens must happen with his sanction. You understand? So he's eliminating possible explanation one by one. You see? That is not possible. Then he says, well, if you say that, there is a distinction in man's consciousness between waking and sleep. The same man is sleeping, same man is waking. Now, this is a difference of state of consciousness. Well, in Satchidananda, it can be that when he is sleeping, perhaps the world has come into existence. And when he is active, the world vanishes to him. To him, we are thinking of his consciousness, remember, not of our consciousness. This is an explanation as to how ignorance arises in the infinite, so that how it feels to the infinite. Could it be that this world is a projection of the active consciousness of the infinite? Could it be that he has double aspect, a passive, a sleeping aspect and a waking aspect? The waking aspect feels to us as world, the sleeping aspect is felt by him as infinite. This also is not possible for us to accept as a position because there cannot be two states, one of which is conscious and another in which is unconscious. He being totally self-aware, there cannot be a portion in Satchidananda which can be unaware of himself. So then this ignorance is something in his consciousness of which he is aware. You follow? Yes. He must know, and he must know. Then he says, the why and the wherefore, possible why and wherefore to our mind. In the Satchidananda, no such two states can be true, for altogether it is only one state that exists. Well, then it must be aware of its passivity, aware of its activity at the same time. So, ignorance cannot have origin in the integral consciousness of Satchidananda, the infinite consciousness, existence, and bliss. In the absolute Brahman, there is no ignorance possible. It can be at the most a partial action in his being. A partial action, that is to say, not constantly existing in his absolute being, but a partial existence in a portion, in an aspect of his being. Identification with this partial being, a total identification with that, and putting back the rest of himself behind, well, can give rise to a kind of ignorance, but then it would not be original ignorance. It would not be original ignorance in the sense of something of which the Brahman is unaware and has come out into existence without his either knowledge or sanction. It can be that for a partial purpose he has put some portion of himself forward and put the rest of his own consciousness back into the background and, well, has allowed that movement to happen. Then it has no place in his permanent original consciousness, but it has a place only in a partial movement in his own consciousness, with his full awareness and, you can say, consent or knowledge. Yes, yes. Ignorance, therefore, is not original ignorance or primal ignorance, but it must be a subsequent movement when it moves into manifestation. Now, can multiplicity be the cause of this ignorance? Because the one became many, could it be that the many forgot identity with the one, or the one forgot identity with the many, or each one of the many forgot identity with the others, you see? And was it because of this self-forgetfulness that ignorance arises? One and the many, could it give rise to ignorance by self-forgetfulness on the part of one, self-forgetful on the part of the many? Each of the many, again, self-forgetfulness of each other. Could it be the cause of ignorance? Trying to analyze it. Well, really speaking, many are the one, and multiplicity of the Brahman is not the origin ignorance of the Brahman, because it contains all at the same time, one and the many. One and the many are not this one is on one side and many are on another side. One and many coexist at the same time. So that consciousness of the one and consciousness of the many, each one of the many conscious of the one must exist at the same time. Each is aware of the oneness. So individual consciousness in the many is identical or equal to the dividing. When mind divides and identifies itself with the form, mind divides the individual consciousness and completely one with the form, body or life or mind, then ignorance can arise. But then what is a form? Because form must be Satchidananda. You cannot deny, you see the complete identity. What is a form? It is a formation of energy. Form is not something that comes out of something else. It's on energy. Energy is consciousness. And then force of consciousness moving all the time, that is what you know as energy. And then it must be that energy is concentrated. And by concentration brought about this form. The supreme consciousness of the infinite has concentrated, and the form is a result of this concentration of the original energy. We say, people will say material energy, but there is no material energy now. We have only one Satchidananda. You see, it's conscious energy. Then the form is a creation of a concentration of this infinite or original consciousness, energy. And this concentration must be purposive. It cannot be a concentration by accident, you see. The concentration is intentional. Concentration is like brooding, you see. It is a bringing into existence something which it wants, and therefore it concentrates, creates a form of energy, which to us appears as a form of matter. Really speaking, it is form of energy. And this force creating the form, and that becomes the physical basis of division. This concentration of the infinite consciousness, infinite energy, creating the form, becomes a physical basis of division, you see, to our consciousness. Ignorance, well, originates in this self absorbed consciousness of the original tapas, original energy. Original energy absorbed completely into the form gives rise to the basis on which, well, what we feel is ignorance arises. It is an intentional concentration there, meant for some purpose. To the consciousness, it is an intentional consciousness. Concentration, brooding. And by brooding, it maintains that concentration there of the form. Well, the form separates. And well, ignorance is nothing else, but it originates in this self absorbed concentration or brooding of the infinite. You see, in a separative movement of force, a separative movement of force is allowed in the concentration. And this separative movement, creating a basis for division, gives rise to what we feel as ignorance. Now, what is this exclusive concentration or self absorbed concentration? We must know, because how can the Brahman, he is not an individual human self, but a total divine and infinite self, and it maintains the form by a concentration of its energy there. Ignorance can therefore only be a partial movement or a part movement, in which part of the being is put behind and a part of being is put forward. Satchidanand puts some concentration of himself, his own energy forward, and the rest of it is pulled backward. Excluding the rest of his awareness and putting forward a partial being or a partial knowledge of himself, even in concentration or brooding, well, seems to create what we feel as ignorance. If we say that You get into the consciousness of the one, excluding the many, yes, then partial ignorance can arise. If you go into the consciousness of the many and keep out the consciousness of the one, yes, you can say ignorance can arise, partial ignorance at any rate. Individual can take up his stand in his ego, exclude the one, exclude the many, then ignorance can arise. Three possibilities you can see clearly, that if one excludes the many, then again ignorance can arise. If the many exclude the one, ignorance can arise. Or if the individual, ego taking up a individual independent stand, well, excludes or keeps out the knowledge or awareness of one and many, then also a multiple ignorance can arise. But such an ignorance would be only possible in nature, not in Satchidananda, he says. Such an ignorance of keeping out the one, concentrating on the one and keeping out the many, or the many concentrating on themselves and keeping out the one, would be possible only in nature, in the active being. Then ignorance is nature's purposeful oblivion of self. If that happens in Satchidananda, then it must be that nature's purposeful oblivion of self and of all, leaving them aside in order to do solely what nature or this purpose has something to do in outer play of existence. In some play of existence, it has to do some work. And in order to do that, it is only pulling back the greater concentration behind and putting forward an exclusive concentration in front, a self absorption, so to say, of energy. In the infinite awareness, this power of concentration and self awareness is always present. Tapas, as you call it, power of self awareness, power of brooding. It's always present because it is constantly breeding on the infinite content of its consciousness. It is an infinite content, and the power of tapas or the self absorption is all the time present. It can concentrate and absorb on one point, on another point, on third point, and fourth point, on million points. It can absorb its own consciousness, and that absorption being that of in ultimate reality gives rise to an actuality in the process of the cosmos. In the process of the universal flow, all that is power of concentration or tapas, power of brooding or self-absorption creates, becomes a reality. Because it's not mind that is absorbing itself or self-absorption, or it's not mental. In the mind, if there is only a will, it may actualize itself or it may not. Because mental power of concentration is limited in its capacity to turn itself into a reality. But this being the concentration of an absolute omnipresent reality, each determination or each self-absorption is charged with the whole power of the infinite. You see, it is automatically sent out, so to say, with sufficient power to realize itself. It cannot be that power to actualize itself is inadequate. The will, knowledge is there, but the will is not there. The will is there, but conditions are not ready. There is no such thing, because it's a determination or a self-absorption of the infinite. Therefore, each determination or each self-absorption is charged with the power of self-realization, or what we call materialization. It doesn't require any outer help to, well, it's like a seed. You take the instance of a seed. You see, there is nobody to tell the seed that you have to become this plant. It is there. Because that determination has gone out from the self-absorption concentration of the Supreme, and it is there all the time, constantly working, you see. So, this it is present in the infinite awareness, this power of self-absorption or concentration. And if you say essential power of, let us imagine now, he says, the Satchidanand essentially conscious of himself. When he is essentially absorbed in himself, it is complete, absolute silence. And when this absolute silence is projected to manifestation, it becomes unconscious. At one hand, you have absolute silence in the essential concentration. When he is absorbed in his essential being, the omnipresent reality, self absorption takes place, and it is absolute being, well, then absolute silence. The same translates itself here in the cosmos as in conscience. It is also complete silence in one sense. Silence in the sense of, well, non expression of the being. Silence means not non being. Remember, silence is not non existence. Silence you cannot ask. In the silence, the consciousness is held back from expression, from manifestation. Silence is not non existence. Silence is not non being. Silence is not void. Remember that, because many people mistake when they say silence means nothing. No, silence means the whole content of being held back from expression. That's all. Well, here in the essential concentration of the Satchidananda, well, the whole thing is held back. Here also, the whole thing is held back. Only to the mind it appears in conscience. Probably the same silence is there. Absolute silence of the self. Two ends of the same concentration appear into the mind, one end silence, another end appearing as inconscience. Supposing it concentrates and absorbs itself integrally into its total aspects, then what it will take, it will be conscious of its total truth consciousness, or it will be conscious of its infinite existence consciousness and bliss. On this side, it will be conscious of, well, the supermind, the truth consciousness. When it concentrates itself on the totality of its own self, integral self-absorption or integral concentration, then it will be conscious of its infinite consciousness, existence and bliss. And in the projected cosmos, it will be felt as a truth consciousness, Vignan, the supramental consciousness. Same concentration, well, on the side of creation will be felt as supermind, as creative consciousness, truth consciousness. Up till now, ignorance has not arisen. He is watching the process of concentration in the Supreme. You have to, screw up your mind. And yes, you don't think that you can live on stupid physical mind and understand it. When you can't. It's not meant for that. It is meant to readjust the screws of human intellect. This is a process in which you have to screw up, open out something and make it a little loose so that something more can enter into it. If you don't make it loose, it won't enter, you see. Because he's asking you to participate with the concentration of the Supreme. Now, how is a little creature to participate in the concentration of the Supreme? Well, it is because a great light is there and he is the incarnation is there, therefore he is able to give you. Nobody can perform this feat, it's it is the greatest miracle, but somebody who brings the light says, how it feels, all right, I'll tell you how it feels. Only you change your mind a little and then you will be able to follow, otherwise not. Yes. A concentration that is integral in the Supreme gives rise to truth. Up till now, ignorance has not arisen, he says. Look. Huh? So many girls Up till now in the Supreme, the ignorance has not arisen. He says, silence in conscience. No ignorance here. Inconscience is not ignorance. Ignorance requires a consciousness that I am ignorant. There is no ignorance. It is silence. Well, integral consciousness of infinite being, consciousness and bliss, truth consciousness. There is no ignorance in the supermind. Nothing. It's all truth consciousness giving rise to a true world, real idea, as he says in Life Divine. He calls in the Life Divine this truth consciousness is working real idea, not mental idea. Then he says that so, if now he takes up the position of a multiple concentration, that is to say, a global over mental consciousness, what Mother puts it as the global thinking. You see, if in his global self he concentrates, total being, puts it, the whole cosmos and the lower world and it's a contact of the higher world together, in the global consciousness, there is an awareness which is over mental awareness, global awareness of the cosmos and also something above the cosmos. The two exist. And then when he puts in a separative consciousness or separative self-absorption, then ignorance becomes possible. A separative self-absorption, an absorption in which he separates a part of himself from his own being and says, now I will put it out for the time being. Well, in that case, ignorance arises. Ignorance doesn't arise so long as he is concentrated or absorbed in his essential self, in his integral self, in his multiple self. It is only when separative self comes into being or separative self-absorption comes into being that ignorance can arise. In the absolute, all these are held together. Remember, now we go to the absolute after. The essential concentration, integral concentration, multiple concentration, separative concentration. All these are held at the same time in the indivisible absolute consciousness. They are not, as it were, gone out of his hand and lost, so to say. All the four. Yeah. The essential, the integral, the multiple, separative. All that is held together in the indivisible, infinite consciousness. So there you find single indivisible being in which it is felt as if it is extension, diffusion, dispersion, distribution. He holds it. How does he hold it? Extension of himself, silence to silence, diffusion of himself, dispersion of himself, distribution of himself. Well, then you see that's how it might feel. It is held by one concentration, total concentration. And when a wall is created, you see here, exclusive concentration on or in this subject is not denial of the spirit's awareness. When exclusive concentration takes place, the spirit is not denied. Only when a separative wall is created in awareness, then the rest of the self is felt as if outside. In self-awareness, if you create a wall, and the rest of the self is left outside the wall, then you feel within the wall or outside the wall something which makes you feel ignorance, because part of the self is left outside. When a wall is created in awareness, then the rest of the self is put outside the wall, then what we call ignorance is produced or created. What we feel as ignorance comes to be created. It is therefore, now in his own words, self-limiting knowledge. Self-limiting knowledge, yes, becomes separative knowledge. Self-limiting knowledge becomes self-separative knowledge, and when it becomes separative and limiting knowledge, it is ignorance to us. You see, that is ignorance. You see, when it is self-limiting, yes, and separative, limits itself and separates itself, well, then you say, in the awareness, ignorance has arisen. What we know as ignorance is there now. To him, it is self-limitation. Not only self-limitation, but a separative knowledge, because it is awareness is put forward for a purpose. But it becomes effective ignorance. Now he says, you have not understood it, so he comes to your help and says, well, I'll explain a little more. Otherwise you'll get puzzled and say how all this has happened. He says, take man's consciousness. Because after all, man also is that, isn't it? Ultimately there is no division. So take man, he says. Let us take a human being. Now in man there is a mental consciousness. That is what you call man. Man means mental consciousness. He is, really speaking, if you watch the operation of the human consciousness, it is really a fraction of his consciousness that is at work. And behind, the whole sea of consciousness is unexpressed, isn't it? Man has within himself the subliminal, he has within him the superconscient, he has within him the subconscient. All that is there, but when we see man, we see only a fraction of his consciousness operating. Now, we don't say that Yes, this is, he is ignorant in one sense, but he is fully one integral self. We know that it is integral, man is whole. He is not conscious, only a fraction of himself is acting to us. Much of the sea of his consciousness is unknown, so to say, left behind consciousness. He is not aware that there is a sea. The individual man, mental consciousness, is not aware that there is a wide subliminal consciousness, practically an infinite consciousness or a supreme supramental consciousness that is the back. The stream is not conscious of the sea, but the sea is conscious of the tree, of the sea, of the stream. The being behind is conscious, you see? Yes. The stream is not aware of the sea. Man is the stream. And the concentration of his consciousness on the surface, it is unaware of what is behind. It is absorbed in the exclusive concentration on the surface consciousness, and yet the sea acts in that limited part which is put forward. It is not independent, it's not cut off from the sea. He is not aware. He is not aware, but the sea is aware, and it is there working through his conscious part, isn't it? What is acting in his surface consciousness, which is limited to his little vision, is the power of the sea. There is the total consciousness. Yes. He is unaware of what is behind. He is absorbed in the exclusive concentration, and yet the sea is acting in him, and it is the sea that is not ignorant. Sea is not ignorant of what is happening. The surface consciousness is ignorant of what is happening. Now take that back to Satchidananda, and then you will see that the sea is not conscious, but the surface consciousness is unconscious of what is happening, you see. Limited practical self-oblivion, in fact. It's a limited practical self-oblivion, which is the meaning of exclusive concentration of tapas. That is a total man. Total man is the indivisible sea of conscious tapas lying behind. That is really the total man. But what actually takes place is a fractional man. It's a limited man on the surface consciousness. The total man is wider and fully aware. Well, the surface man is quite unaware. Now, this putting forward of a personality from behind by the sea of consciousness as an individual is an act of exclusive concentration for a purpose. Because if total presence was there, perhaps the man would not be able to act in the present. Yes, you see. For instance, man lives completely ignorant of his past and future. He only lives in the present. Take only one aspect. Now he says, supposing the whole of the past was living with the same intensity as the present, he would find very difficult to act. Very difficult to act. Supposing your childhood, from childhood to now, the whole of it was in the range of the present. Well, you would be seeing so many things and aspects of your own self that in a situation that is given today, you will find very difficult to the whole past actually present. Well, how to decide what to do? But all that is held back. It's not destroyed. It's not non-existence. It's not that it is gone. It is not as if it is dissolved. No, it is there. But it is held back. It is put back. And only a point is put forward of consciousness so that it deals with the present. Well, then you deal with it as if you are meeting a new situation, and a situation in which your total consciousness, which is absorbed in your own being, I mean the exclusive concentration in you, which is the Satchidananda in you, is able to decide as if, oh, I have to decide now this particular point. If the total was present, the purpose of manifestation would not be served. Don't you see the point? Yes. Now, that is what he wants to say. One point, that if the whole past, present, and future was present at the same time, well, the true being knows all that. The true being of man knows past, present, and future. It's not that it doesn't know. It's not ignorant. It knows. But living in the present is necessary, and therefore exclusive concentration on the present moment brings about the practicality and practical result. Otherwise, pragmatic truth would be lost, and it would not fulfill the purpose of assuming the individual role and giving one particular being a name and a form and a function, so to say. Now, take another aspect of man. Take a human personality, he says. One individual plays many parts because he has many personalities in him. Man is never simple, unitarian. He is multiple personality in the same being. Man is, brother of somebody, father of somebody, husband of somebody, member of a club. He is a member in a service car. That each is perhaps a different personality. You cannot say that all man is one and the same everywhere. No, the man in the club is not the same as man in the house. You see. So that a man in the laboratory, for instance, is not the same as one who plays golf or play under table tennis. You see, it's not the same personality. Now, this, even man, the superficial man, plays many parts in his life because he has many personalities. He can be an actor, poet, soldier, or as we said, so many different personalities of man. Now we say, take these different personalities. In one sense, you can say in each personality, the whole man is acting. It is not as if he cuts himself into one part and the rest of it is cut off. No. The whole man becomes a player. The whole man becomes the actor. But he becomes the actor. His whole concentration, exclusive absorption of concentration is on that personality. Do you understand? He is not acting with his only one. He cuts off his part and say, I am only. No. In order to be a successful player or actor, he has to put his whole concentration into it. Remember, he cannot become effective if he holds himself back. But in that limited concentration, it is he who has to put himself forward, whole of it, so that he is integrally present. And yet, it's an exclusive concentration and a self-absorption. It is not as it were all his being is present. If he remembers in the laboratory that he is somebody's son or husband of somebody, well, he won't be able to carry out his experiment well, you see. So in order to be a successful discoverer, he has to be completely ignorant of his whole total being, though the concentration that is put forward in his personality, which is put forward, is the concentration of his total being. It's not a part concentration, as if he says, oh, I put one concentration there and another concentration here. No, where he is total. It is a total concentration that is present. Now, past, present, the part of man as a poet or actor or anybody, you see, is only a separative determination of his own self, of his tapas, of his concentration. He has not yet created a wall. When he becomes an actor, he has not created a wall between his other personality than himself. Wall is something that he can pass. But supposing by some chance he has exclusively concentrated on one aspect and created a wall, that would be real ignorance. That would be real ignorance. He would say, oh, I am only an actor. The capacity of being an actor is the result of his total self, remember. And yet, the concentration, exclusive concentration of his own being on that part of his personality, if it creates a wall and succeeds in separating the portion of his own personality from his total self, well, then effective ignorance has come into being. Then he is ignorant, really, because he has forgotten his true self, from which this projection had been, forwarded or put forward. Well, man can go back to his total personality, and the whole wall is something that can be dissolved or broken. You can remove the wall. Complete self-forgetfulness can be the result of an exclusive concentration. If you say a soldier completely forgetting himself on the battlefield about everything except the fighting and the charge or whatever his task is given to him, Well, that gives him maximum effectivity. And if he becomes completely forgetful of his other self, it is ignorance. That becomes ignorance effective. The poet or the anger coming into man, you see, it is real. This separation is real, but it's not the whole truth of the man. The whole truth of the man is that he is one. Whether he is, even if he forgets himself, the total self is not destroyed, it is there. Self forgetfulness is only a temporary movement in normal operation of this ignorance. Now, universal consciousness can carry this self forgetfulness to an absolute point. Universal consciousness, cosmic consciousness, can carry this self forgetfulness to the what you call the absolute point of real self forgetfulness. That is to say, then it becomes inconscience. It becomes complete inconscience. There is a soul, there is a secret self, there is a will, there is intelligence, and yet it is complete self absorption, such a point, absolute point of self forgetfulness. That is matter, that is even below matter. Why matter? Matter is conscious, but below matter, what you call the inconscience is, it is that absolute point of self forgetfulness of concentration. Prakriti to us, nature to us is inconscient because the consciousness is imprisoned in the outer form. It is imprisoned in the outer form. And consequently, the consciousness also becomes inconscient. The Purusha identifies himself with the form and he also becomes inconscient. Our physical being is some counterpart of that identification where the physical being completely identifies it with the with material part of ourselves, so to say. But this inconscience is really superficial, like the subconscious state of man in sleep. When the man is when he's sleeping, consciousness is not absent. Consciousness is held back. Well, yes. This inconscience also is superficial. Like the sleep, subconsciousness of our consciousness, well, the matter or inconscience appears as if it was really inconscience, it is not. Only its self-forgetfulness and has become law of his action. Forgetfulness is so thorough, so complete, the point of absolute forgetfulness has been reached. So much so that to the matter, inconscience is the law of operation. It must operate inconsciently only. It has become almost something which it must obey. But in that case, therefore, this ignorance is not in the original consciousness as ignorance. It is only phenomenal. Ignorance is only in the phenomena, not in the reality, because essential concentration is conscious of itself, integral concentration is conscious of itself, multiple concentration is conscious of itself. It is only when the last comes that you find this possibility of ignorance arising. So that ignorance is really practical or phenomenal, not in reality, superficial, really speaking, and not at all real and integral. It is not real and it's neither integral. Because then you say, but why does this integral consciousness or infinite consciousness do this thing? This is the process. What he explained is the process. He didn't give us the why of it. So he says, why does it allow? He says, yes, there is a why. Even a why. That's what staggered Dr. Maitra, Says it's an intellectual feat. I have never seen the equal of it in the world's literature. That somebody actually explaining how the Supreme feels the ignorance. And not only that, how omnipotent and omniscient reality has permitted ignorance within its own self for a purpose. It's a tremendous thing. It is just like that chapter of, the supra-rational ultimate of life in human cycle. It's a talk in literary world. There is none in the worlds of thought, in the social writing, that can come near it. The supra-rational ultimate of life is a chapter by itself. It's like a revelation. Social life, he says that the whole life is seeking the supra-rational. And he proves it. The point is not that he says, many people say, but the question is to carry conviction to your mind. You see? Well, here now you see, he said, the why of it, yes. What is the reason of this allowing self absorption or a limited concentration to dominate a certain separative state, even? Not the total state. That we have seen that in the total aspect of Satchidananda, it is not present as ignorance. It is in a partial movement, temporal movement, and superficial movement. Why? He says if it was not there, the object of manifestation of this world would not be complete. A world would be impossible. The world would not be possible. It is necessary for a creation. For example, if man, take man's case, if man lived in his timeless eternal consciousness all the time, he cannot throw himself in the stream of time with that concentration as if this is the moment he must seize and act, is it not? Because he is all the time conscious of his eternity, all the time living in the eternal. Oh, the present looks to him, oh, nothing. What you do or not do doesn't matter. Perhaps that is what would happen to mind if it went to the eternity and remained there. If constant remaining or station in the eternal was allowed to man, man would not be able to seize the moment of the present and decide an act. If Satchidananda allowed his absoluteness and eternity and infinity all the time to dominate his concentration, his consciousness and his tapas, his brooding, world cannot come into being. World comes into being because he allows a movement to take place within his own self in which, well, a separative consciousness creates what we feel as effective ignorance, a complete point of self-absorption in which the total self of the divine is put back. Yes, well, if he was in the superconscient all the time, he couldn't have used this individual not. If he was present, conscious only of the the superconscious being, then this individual not which has been given to him for a purpose, well, he wouldn't have used it with effectivity. The world of relations which is given with it, you see, it is meant as a complex of forces or as a pattern, or as you call it, a web of relations, you see, which is woven. In the present time, a relation, is allowed to arise. And it is that relation which creates the, what you call the play of world or cosmos, universe. Well, if one lived constantly in the supra-rational or supra-mental, he would not be able to participate in the movement of creating this web of relations in which each individual, as an individual, has to play his part, you see. If he was in the universal self all the time, no separate action could be evolved by him. He could all the time remain in the cosmic and work. This temporal, psychological, and egoistic ignorance is therefore necessary. Temporal, egoistic, and psychological separation means which is ignorance is necessary because purpose is to trace the cycle of self-oblivion and self-discovery. Self-oblivion, it has absorbed itself and forgotten. So there is self-oblivion. Now, through the self-oblivion, evolving mind and light and so on, it traces self-discovery. From self-oblivion to self-discovery. You see, that is the delight of this Satchidananda. That complete self-oblivion in the inconscient, in the human separative ego consciousness, and a self-discovery back. Well, that is the movement of delight in the indivisible. It has not divided itself at all. You see, it's a rediscovery by a self-oblivion and self-discovery. To find himself in the apparent opposites of his own being, so to say, well, that is why the Satchidananda descended into the nations. Into the nescience, complete inconscience. Nescience is a further degree of inconscience. Nescience is opposite of consciousness. Inconscience is absent of consciousness. Subconsciousness is the lower state of consciousness. Remember, there are strata of unconsciousness which you have to know a little. You see, it would be something like that. If inconscience is here, it will give rise to matter from it, you see. But below inconscience there is nescience. Nescience is opposite of consciousness. Opposite of consciousness. This is absence of consciousness. This is opposite, you see? Opposition to consciousness. And in matter you don't see any consciousness. It is inconscient but subject to law. So there it is inconscient, but inconscient that has brought a degree of intelligence or will towards, you see. Matter is not complete in conscience. You see? The subconscious that you feel is below the level of consciousness, which is quite different.